I'm George Galloway and I present Kalima Horra on Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, in London. And we're talking about Iraq, but more particularly, we're talking about the Kurdish people. More than 40 million strong, left high and dry by the Sykes-Picot agreements and by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War. The largest national group with no right of self-determination anywhere, and now for almost 100 years. This is a grave problem, not just for the Kurds, because of course if Kurdish self-determination can be described as an irresistible force, then the immovable object is the fact that in order to exercise that right of self-determination, pre-existing states are going to have to be broken up. Now, that's a major undertaking, even in today's topsy-turvy turmoil of the Middle East. It cannot be resolved piece by piece, in my opinion, though some of our distinguished experts in the audience may have a different point of view, because the other powers who don't want to break up their territory but are quite content to see their neighbours break up theirs, have to be taken into account. We're looking today at what the agenda is in the Declaration of Independence, a separate state of Kurdistan, by the Iraqi Kurdish leader Barzani. We're looking at the timing of it, we're looking at the friends of it, the foes of it, what the practicalities are. For example, the issue of Kirkuk, Iraq's second largest oil field, and the ethnic cleansing that has taken place there, the forced repopulation of Kirkuk in order to try and gerrymander a result in any self-determination test there. This is a grave problem. The Kurds have been massacred in many of the countries into which they were placed against their will, without anyone consulting them at all. The worst massacres in the recent period have been in Turkey. And this brings me to another vexatious issue. As the British peer member of the House of Lords, Lord Archer, once put it, when tasked with the apparent contradiction that he was supporting Iraqi Kurds against the Iraqi regime in Baghdad, but opposing Turkish Kurds against the Turkish NATO ally in Ankara, he said pricelessly, well, you see, there are good Kurds and there are bad Kurds. And what he meant was, the good Kurds are those who are fighting our enemies, and the bad Kurds are those who are fighting our friends. And this can be glimpsed again in the international reaction to Barzani's declaration of independence. Only one country has leapt forward to say that they will recognize this independent state and give it every assistance that they can, and that country is Netanyahu's Israel. That should come as no surprise, because Israel has been deeply involved with Iraqi Kurdish struggles for many decades. That does not invalidate those struggles, but it places in a certain light the hypocrisy of an Israeli state that will not recognize Palestinian rights of self-determination, but demands that people should recognize the right of self-determination by the Kurds in Iraq. Probably not the Kurds in Turkey, depending on what the current calibration of relations between Israel and President Erdogan is. As that changes most days, I'm not entirely up to date with it. It's also undeniably true that the United States currently favors the breakaway from the Iraqi state of Kurdistan. And that too should not come as a surprise, because they too are hypocrites, ready to leave UNESCO because it has the temerity to invite Palestinians into it, but ready to break up Iraq and use its enormous financial and diplomatic and even military power to defend the Kurds' right to their own independent state. Has Barzani miscalculated, or is this a kind of masterstroke? ISIS are on the retreat. Kurdish people in Iraq, but more particularly actually in Syria, have played an heroic role in the defeat of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those who think and act like them. It may be that Barzani is calculating that the Kurdish idea has quite a bit of political capital in the bank now, and that this is the time to cash it in. But what will be the impact on neighboring countries like Iran, which also has a Kurdish population, Syria, which is coming to the end, one hopes, of its long war against foreign aggression and invasion of its territory? Is its army going to have fought all these years to capture every last inch of Syrian territory, only to give it away to the Kurdish forces who have played a role, no doubt, in the defeat of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria? One thing's for sure, Erdogan is not going to recognize Kurdish rights. It's not so long ago it was illegal even to speak Kurdish in Turkey. Great cities in Turkey have been leveled like it was the Second World War by a NATO member, Erdogan, and a Western ally, at least the last time I looked. Well, all of these are complicated subjects. Everyone in here is entitled to their Kalima Horra, their free word about them. I'm responsible for what I say. Mayadeen is not responsible for what I say. And everyone here is responsible for what they are about to say now. Our first guest is indeed a distinguished expert, an Iraqi, Dr. Sami Ramadani. The floor is yours. Go ahead, kick us off.
Thank you, George. One thing you referred to in your introduction, George, was, has Barzani miscalculated? Because I want to go to the heart of the matter here. And I think this is a key question. It's a key question because Barzani is not a democratically elected leader of the Kurdish people. His presidency expired 2 years ago. He's a dictator. When I say dictator, I mean it literally, because he and his clan members are controlling Iraqi Kurdistan or large parts of Iraqi Kurdistan. So what the referendum he has called for does not represent the right of the Kurdish people to self-determination, which I have always supported and will always support throughout my political life. His son, Masroor, controls the intelligence service. He's head of intelligence. His other son, Mansour, is a senior general in the Peshmerga. His nephew, Najirvan Barzani, is the prime minister. His brother, Waji, is another senior general in the Peshmerga. And every Kurd knows, whether his supporters or critics in Iraqi Kurdistan, and his critics are numerous. They represent, in my opinion, probably the majority of the Kurdish people, because they see the corruption, they see what Kurdistan has been brought down to. Agriculture is ruined. There's an elite that rules the country, and his power base has been threatened. And that's where the timing comes in, George. His power base has been threatened because more and more Kurdish people are opposing his rule and his corruption, including many members of the Iraqi parliament.
What about Kirkuk? Kirkuk is vitally important. It is an Iraqi vital interest. Yet the government in Kurdistan is determined that they shall have Kirkuk. The seeds of an actual war, an all-out war, are present in that conundrum, are they not?
Kirkuk, as you say, is extremely important to Iraq in general, to the Kurdish people, to Arabs, to the Turkomans who live in Kirkuk. Kirkuk has always been a mixed city. The 1957 plebiscite census, which everybody agrees to, including the Kurdish leadership, 1957 census showed that 49% of the population were Kurdish, and about 30% were Arab, and about 20% Turkoman. And there are 1 or 2% other minorities. But what Barzani has done is not only take over Kirkuk, but large swathes of the Diyala province, wiped out some Arab villages, generating ethnic cleansing in the areas his forces have controlled, and areas within the Mosul, Nineveh province. His forces, the Peshmerga forces, used to control Sinjar, the capital of the Yazidi people. His Peshmerga withdrew from Sinjar 24 hours before ISIS arrived. As soon as ISIS started taking over Mosul, his forces moved and expanded the territory under his control by more than a third of the entire area of regional Kurdistan, the regional government of Kurdistan. So you can see that there was a de facto, and I stress de facto because I don't know all the ins and outs of the secrets of Barzani's relations, but de facto there was an alliance between ISIS and the Peshmerga forces that were under his control. Another aspect that people should, I think, point out, George, is that the media here does not tell us that there was a bitter civil war in Iraqi Kurdistan between the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, led by Talbani, and the Kurdistan Democratic Party, led by Barzani. From 1994 to 1998, thousands of Kurds died. And this split is still here today. There are two states in Kurdistan, not one. States within states. One led by the PKK, and other organizations, and one led by KDP's Barzani. So you have the elements of a Sudan situation, South Sudan situation, that this is not a genuine self-determination cause, which I support very strongly. The Kurdish people have fought for decades to gain their rights, but their rights have been trampled upon by an elite that has sequestered, that has robbed their struggles, and have established corrupt rule. And I think this will lead to another Kurdish civil war. What he's doing is gambling with the fate of the Kurdish people, and he shouldn't do that. Sulaimaniya, the cultural capital of Kurdistan, Erbil is the administrative capital, overwhelmingly is against what Barzani is doing. And the media needs to report that as well, that the Kurdish people are not represented fairly, democratically by the leadership of Barzani. The complexities of the situation are enormous. There are 1 million Kurds, George, in Baghdad, more than any Kurdish city.
I know many of them.
And this is something that is not also reported, that there are loads of villages, towns, cities, which are mixed. What's he going to do? This fragmentation of the region is not in the interest of the Kurdish people or the peoples of the region, which are faced with terrorism, with U.S. interference and interventions and wars, as we know. They destroyed Libya. They have nearly destroyed Syria. They destroyed much of Iraq. And what they are doing is to further fragment the region. They are losing in Syria. What have they opened? They want to open another front in Kurdistan as a base against Iran. There are strategic interests involved here. Israel and the United States want to use Iraqi Kurdistan as a base against Iran. So this is yet another dimension in which Barzani is dragging the Kurdish people and trampling, in my opinion, on their historic right to self-determination within a democratic Kurdistan and within a democratic Iraq. And this is what the Iraqi democratic movements have been struggling for many decades, George. Since I speak, in fact, that they see the struggle of the Kurdish people as part of the struggle of the Iraqi people for democracy. Once that is achieved, then it is then that the Kurdish people can freely and democratically exercise their national right to self-determination.
It's not just, if you like, strategic, the Israeli interest, is it? They have a clear strategic interest, causing problems for Iran, causing problems for Iraq, a once mighty Arab country, rich and powerful. It's an ideological thing for them. They believe, have to believe, in ethno-religious states. They would like to create them elsewhere too. In Lebanon, in Syria, they have tried hard to bring about ethno-religious states as a justification for their own self-declared ethno-religious state. Isn't that right?
I think you are absolutely right. They want to create a mirror image. And that, what will that do for them politically in the world is that we are the democratic state which can protect minorities. We can protect all these minorities which are being subjugated in the region by the likes of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whichever terrorist group that they, Israel, might want to support. And there are enough evidence now to show that Israel were in league with Al-Qaeda in Syria. This is beyond doubt. Netanyahu himself visited their injured fighters in the occupied Golan Heights, the Syrian territory that Israel occupied since 1967. And those they cannot treat in the Golan Heights, they took with helicopters to other hospitals inside Israel. They are in league with Al-Qaeda precisely for the project you have pointed out. They want to create that mirror image, ethnocentric mirror image.
I just have one final question to you, then we'll go to the break. Will Iraq fight to stop this? And is the current government in Iraq strong enough to fight and succeed in stopping this?
I'm not a supporter of the Baghdad government. As you probably know, George, I've always, all my political life, fought for democratic rights for the Iraqi people. And this government has been tainted by the occupation of Iraq in 2003 by the United States. The constitution by which they rule, I find extremely harmful to the long-term interests of the Iraqi people, including the Kurdish people. Has Barzani asked them for self-determination? What would he do with hundreds of thousands of other ethnicities? The Yazidis, by the way, are extremely critical of Barzani's leadership. The Yazidis whose women were kidnapped by the thousands by ISIS. Go and ask any Yazidi and they'll tell you that Barzani had it in for them because they never supported his leadership.
Much more of this after the break. I'm George Galloway, and this is Kalima Horra on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but talking about the Kurdish people, their rights, and in particular, the step taken by the Kurdish leader Barzani in declaring that he's going to declare the actual independence of Kurdistan and the breakup of the Iraqi state. We took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to hear what the people thought. Take a look at this.
Do you think that the Kurds have the right to ask for an independent state?
Well, I mean, I don't support the superimposition of any conglomerate state on a union that wants to be independent. I also think it's a flaw to have this nationalistic standpoint. But mainly I think that they should absolutely be allowed to ask for independence.
Kurdistan should stay part of Iraq because at the point they're financially and politically unstable.
I think that anyone in the world should have the right to ask for independence as long as they have actually a strong case about it and they know how they're going to get through this process. I think this is the most important part, and not do it with violence and with many people being heard about this. But definitely they have been oppressed by the Turkish government. They have had many conflicts in Syria too, and they are in some part independent, but they have to be recognized internationally so they could actually make progress towards their own state and nation.
So do you think that the Kurds have the right for an independent state?
So from my personal perspective, I think historically speaking, the Kurds have been the forgotten ones of Sykes-Picot agreements. Obviously those agreements have done, I think, tremendous damage to the region.
At the very moment, I don't really think the Kurdish should really go for it, the Kurdish people, because Iraqi forces right now fighting against ISIS. And me, as a Middle Eastern Arab, I really have some doubts about the supporters of the referendum. So I'm not really sure who really supports the Kurdish referendum, whether it's Western countries or the United States.
Well, quite an educated response there on the streets of London. Let's hear what the equally, even more educated, distinguished audience here in London think. Yes, sir, the floor is yours.
My name is Dr. Mohammed Haider. I'm a financial analyst by our teacher by profession and some political practice and analysis. Two major points I'm really concerned about is, one is who are the forces who are putting their weight behind driving the Kurdish people or the Kurdish leadership to go into that grave, as you described, and why now? I wouldn't say it's independent as much as separating. The second issue is the economic issue. Is there any economic and financial sustainability for this Kurdish, let's say, government or Kurdish new nation? Can they really survive by taking such a decision? The first issue is who is behind. Definitely, some of them, they identified themselves, like the Israeli, like the American, and some of the European who really were pushing, whether publicly or under the table or behind the curtain, to push the Kurdish into such a situation. Who will bear the consequences? And that's what when it comes for the economic sustainability. From economic and financial point of view, I can see that this region is coming to a really very difficult and hardship from economic point of view. First of all, the whole region is passing through a very difficult situation. There is a chaos in the whole area, and the chaos, or who behind the chaos, is the United States and others as well. Plus, we contribute ourselves, our leadership, the Arab countries are contributing toward this situation, and we are not serving our people properly. But from economic point of view, first of all, if this nation has to rise, first of all, the borders is with the four major countries: Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey. And none of these countries agree to what happened. And no one will allow them to trade or use their border for communicating or transporting or have any connection with the rest of the world. Each country is entitled to say, I'm closing my borders. No planes are allowed to go and fly in our sky. So what's happening now? There's a big chaos inside. Nobody's talking about it. They are contributing to selling the Iraqi oil, giving it, some of them, to the Turks through personal agreement between the Barzani family and the Turkish, who are, whether it's the son of Erdogan at the moment, or the oil coming from Syria. It's all coming through this corridor. But it's not going to continue, because now the situation is threatening the whole four nations, the whole countries. So this is dangerous for the whole region, and this issue has to be really taken in consideration, and I would say a peaceful approach with the Kurds, and based on a common understanding, and not leading the region into another civil war, and mainly between the Iraqi themselves.
Well, that's all common sense, of course, and not very different from what your colleague said. So it falls to me, I think, then, to put the Kurdish point of view as the devil's advocate. You see, at the end of the First World War, the United States said that self-determination was to be the future. But the Kurdish people never got it. In fact, they never got recognition that they were a people. But they very clearly are a national group. They have a common language, a common culture, a common history, and they want, overwhelmingly, wherever they are, whether it's London or in the north of Syria or in Iraq or in Turkey, they want to be recognized as a national group. Now, my political standpoint, it's not that different from Dr. Sami's, is that all nations have the right of self-determination. They don't have to have a separate state necessarily in order to exercise that right of self-determination. But if they want to have a separate state, they must have one. And it's everybody else's responsibility to try and make them feel welcome where they are, try and make the arrangements that will satisfy them where they are. Now, it would appear, although I'm not an expert on it, I've never been in Iraqi Kurdistan, it would appear that the time has come so far as the Kurds in Iraq are concerned. After all, they have had a very substantial amount of autonomy, actually for a very long time. Even under Saddam Hussein, they had a measure of autonomy. Then they effectively were not governed by Baghdad. And since the Iraq war in 2003, they have had, again, a substantial measure of autonomy. It would appear that that has not satisfied them and that they do want to have an independent state. Now, you make the point, Doctor, that, of course, a peaceful approach and a non-sectarian approach and so on is necessary here now. But when the chips are down, if an independent state is declared and Kirkuk is declared to be a part of it, well, there'll be no longer any possibility of a peaceful approach to that, will there?
The issue it becomes here is, I think, the financial reward. What is the financial reward, and why Kirkuk in itself? Kirkuk is like a cosmopolitan region or province in total. It has Christian, Muslims, Arab, Kurds, Turkoman, all these kind of people. Will, for example, the Arab have the right to decide their destiny there? Will they?
Of course, that's...
Will the Assyrians or the Christians have the right to say, we want our own independence or our own autonomy? We want to live in this province. Because we have a common language, we have a common belief, this is what I'm saying, this is the dangerous issue.
You don't have to tell me. You have to take the Christian thing out because that's not a nationality. There are Christians of all kinds in the region. But there's no doubt that the Turkoman and the Syrian and Arabs also have national rights.
The fight in the region, in the Kurdish region, is not a matter of identity. It's a social fight against the imperialism. That's why this Kurdish party is a socialist party. It's not a national Kurdish party. This is the difference.
Barzani is a socialist?
Not the Barzani. I mean, Barzani fled to Russia after the...
that was the father, yeah?
The 1964, yes. So, but I'm saying the fight, for example, the Kurdish in the southeastern region of Turkey are socialist people. It's nothing to do with being, they are communists. Not the PKK is so they are an anti-imperialism movement, and it's not only there; it's in the whole region, and that's why they don't want to show it as like poor people are like proletariat, like fighting the rich people.
Well,
but the Kurds are trapped now in this.
The PKK are undoubtedly a leftist party, but
yes,
they're also a Kurdish nationalist party. You can't deny that.
Yeah, but with the communist ideology.
Well, that sounds all
not
right.
nationalist, yeah.
Let's take this lady. Let's take this lady here.
Okay.
Yes, madam.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here. I am Ejin Omar. I am a medical lawyer from background. I am a law lecturer at Nottingham Trent University, and at the same time I'm a doctoral researcher. I'm researching the current healthcare system of Kurdistan region, and I'm originally from Suleymania. I have got actually a few questions for Mr. Sami. As an Arab from Baghdad, as you indicated, although you disagree from my understanding with Barzani's party, but you are not opposing our rights as Kurdish to become an independent. And the point that is not clear to me is that when do you think is the right for us to call for independence?
It's not for me to say, for a starter, by the way. I'm following what a lot of the Kurdish Democrats and socialists are proposing for Iraqi Kurdistan. They believe strongly, as you would, as I do, in the right of the Kurdish people to self-determination. But they say self-determination, and this is critical, cannot be exercised definitely today in Iraqi Kurdistan. Not today. Okay? And they say this right, which is sacred to them and to the Kurdish people, can and should only be exercised within a democratic Iraqi Kurdistan, and they stress within a democratic Iraq, because they say we should not become an independent state against the will and interests of our neighboring peoples. Iraqi Kurdistan, or Kurdistan in general, is not on the moon. It's in the Middle East. Yeah. They need a good relation.
We'll come back to
you. They need the good relations with the people of Iran, with the rest of the people of Iraq, with the people of Turkey, with the people of Syria. You look at Syria. Syria would be fragmented to smithereens if there is no degree of unity. So I look at it from the point of view of the interests of the Kurdish people and of the Iraqi people in general and the peoples of the region. We belong to a region which is subjected to occupations, to wars, to Israeli expansion. Our countries are being attacked and practically destroyed before our eyes, and Barzani is adding to that, and he's definitely not doing it for the sake of the Kurdish people, but for that corrupt elite that I talked about.
Thank you.
Madam, please.
Yeah, as a Kurdish national, I would like to know what is the best approach, and that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Well, look, it's getting spirited. We better take a break. Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Mayadeen television, coming from London, but discussing Kurdistan and indeed the wider issue of Kurdish national rights. We took the camera onto the streets of London to hear what the people thought. Take a look at this.
Why do you think Israel is the only country that supports an independent Kurdistan?
Well, I believe because Israel is trying to take more opportunity in the Middle East and they want to control more land.
I think that it's, in this sense, it's kind of supporting the same thing that we want, no matter what their political beliefs, but it's in the same kind of movement, as in we want independence. We want to, actually not independence, but we want to support the notion that everyone has the right to declare as independent.
Of course, the Israel state is trying to take use the Kurdish nations within Iraq, Iran, and obviously Turkey to separate these countries and call out for other referendum in the neighboring countries to make them even weaker.
Israel is probably on the same line of thinking as more also other Western powers, in that they probably believe that Kurdistan can be a buffer zone between certain Arab states, or can be a sign of that Kurdistan could bring a little bit of peace to the Middle East.
Well, I think I'm not entirely sure, but I could say it's possibly to deflect the criticism that they're getting for inhabiting somebody else, for taking over somebody else's country and being colonizers.
Do you think the Kurdish separation from Iraq will affect the fight against ISIS?
I don't think so. It's just at this point that we've reached, the fight against ISIS, it's not just about one nation, one state. It's a multipolar, multidisciplinary issue that has to be dealt with many sides and from different sides.
I don't see that necessarily.
I think the fact that they're so present in the fight against ISIS legitimizes their call for a state. I think historically states are built with war, and by the help they're providing the Western alliance, that totally legitimizes their hold on the state and on the territory.
Well, again, quite an educated clutch of views of Londoners. I'm rather proud of the level of consciousness on display there. Over to you, sir.
My name is Payam. I'm from London. I'm a lawyer myself. A couple of centuries ago, they were part of the Kurdish tribe who wisely decided to move to the southwest of Iran and settle there. So a nut job, Barzani, don't have to make a decision for them today. Regarding the gentleman here who said in the US intellectuals make decision for Middle East, I would prefer the term crazed Yankees for making a decision for the Middle East. And what you see today is a chain reaction to what happened in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, who George Galloway have fiercely opposed right from the start and paid a high price for. And what they done, they had a view of new Middle East. This is a follow-up to that. It's not a new thing. This was already envisaged by some countries in the region. And that is why it was opposed. It was not just to oppose a war. It was to oppose these things happening in future. Now it's a breakup of Iraq. What the question here is self-determination, great thing, beautiful. But the question is, what price are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing, you need to do a cost-benefit analysis. Obviously, women and children will die if we have another war. We probably have differences of opinion on the number. Let's say one woman, one child will die in this conflict. Would you be happy to have self-determination for that cost to pay? I don't think many people would agree to that. And it will be a bloody war. If Kurdish try to have self-determination at any cost, just for Barzani to get more power. And if you look at America's policy in the region, they have accidentally dropped weapons to ISIS, accidentally. 2 times we know about, probably happened hundreds of times. 2 times they realized that they messed up. ISIS went to a region like this gentleman already stated, and then Kurdish would go and take it over from them. So it doesn't need a rocket scientist to figure out a land grabbing is going on. And a land grabbing have been happening in Israel where with American weapons, and in this case, it is happening with American weapons who wrongly armed Kurdish forces up to the teeth for free. And then you have Saudi petrodollars who they have remained very silent, strangely, because they share a border with Iraq. Saudi petrodollars are pouring in. That is why, otherwise, there's a lot of oil in Kurdistan. Who are they going to sell it to? They have no access to international waters. You can't ship it. You can't send it via air, although the countries around it have blocked their airspace to it, because it is an illegal election it was. They should have sought the Iraq's government permission first. This is the legislation. Not every people, I'm from Lur tribe, we can't just, and there's a couple of million of us. In Iran you have Lur, you have Kurdish, you have Arab, you have Baluch, you have Turkish, you have people up in the north with Russian roots. They're not asking for self-determination because they know the price will be heavy and they have to pay by their children's blood, by their woman's blood for it. It's not worth it. As long as the children are going to bed with the belly full of food and you can live a good life, that is the main priorities. Self-determination, Kurdistan have a lot of freedoms in your country that you currently exercise. Maybe not 100% as you want, but this world, we need to be realists. This world is never perfect. Wherever you live, wherever you are, it's never perfect. So this is my view.
Well, it's a very powerful contribution, and I'm grateful for it. And it moves us in a way on to an ideological plane, because we're all in favor of self-determination. But what about the self-determination of the others whom your self-determination affects? Now, in some trouble-free parts of the world, you can say that the right of self-determination is absolute. Let's use Scotland as an example. Now, I am against Scottish separatism, but I don't pretend that it represents an existential threat to anybody else. Therefore, I supported the Scottish people's right to have a referendum, a legal one, which could have led to the breakup of Britain and an independent Scottish state coming to pass. I supported that. Although, of course, I campaigned for a no vote against Scottish independence because that's my belief. But if you say that Kurdistan in Iraq is going to declare itself independent, you are automatically impacting on all the other countries in the region. You are automatically impacting on all the national, ethnic minorities within the territory that is being declared independent. And you are, in a war zone, going to become a cat's paw for all the people that are involved in the war. And that's why I think, to answer your point, madam, you said, well, when would be the right time? That's a legitimate point. But equally, it's legitimate to say this is not the time. Because if you do it now, nothing good can come of it. All the borders will be sealed. There may have to be a war to stop you from doing it, to stop Israel making it a military base, for example, which could happen. Barzani could welcome Netanyahu on a state visit, and they could decide that the Israeli army is going to be stationed in Kurdistan. That's a theoretical possibility, but actually quite a real one, because the Israelis are already in Kurdistan in quite considerable number. This can never be allowed to stand. Iran could never allow that to stand. Iraq could never allow it to stand. So we have a set of competing claims here, competing interests and competing rights. Gentleman in the middle, you, sir?
My name is Albert Loussa. I'm a human rights lawyer. I know very little or nothing of the Kurdish conflict, but from a human rights point of view, the situation seems quite clear. The peoples have a right, all peoples have a right to self-determination under the UN Charter, the world's constitution, and under Article 1 of the Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. I assume Iraq signed up to those treaties. I'm not sure. But if Iraq signed up...
Probably not.
I'd be surprised, but maybe they haven't. But if Iraq has signed up to the covenant, they have obligations under international law to facilitate the exercise of self-determination. And this gentleman raised a very interesting point. What price is Kurdistan willing to pay to exercise that right? That right has been exercised, better or worse, but they did organize a referendum. It may or may not have been lawful within Iraqi law, but it was a referendum organized by, apparently, the Kurdish people and the current authorities there. So they did self-determinate. The other issue is whether this is enforceable, and the issue of recognition that you brought up But in terms of the price that they're willing to pay, it seems that everybody expects there has to be an armed conflict as a result. Well, should there be? Why does Iraq or the other neighboring countries feel the need to prevent it by force?
Because it's their territory, maybe?
Maybe, yes, but...
Under their constitution?
Yes.
You see, if you don't mind my saying so, your contribution was pristine in academic terms, but completely unworldly in real terms.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
People doesn't...
as Bill Shankly, the legendary football manager of Liverpool, put it, when someone said to him, on paper, you should beat them. He said, the problem is football isn't played on paper, it's played on grass. And the reality is that no international law can force a nation state to break itself up. And any international law that pretends it can is an ass. The law is an ass in that case. And this crystallizes, actually, you get me angry now, this crystallizes the globalization idea that was theorized by Blair in his Chicago speech, that you have a right to tell Iraq that it needs to break up because of international law, and moreover, in Blair's case, we'll invade you to make sure that you do if you defy us. We live in a world where in the real world, nation states have the right to defend their territorial integrity, and they will. Well, you shake your head. You may say, I think you're shaking your head because they don't have the right. Okay. They may not have the right, but they will. And that's more important. That's more important. Dr. Sami.
Yeah. I think one point has been forgotten, which is that really Iraqi Kurdistan is a state within a state. The borders, all entry borders are controlled by the KRG. The airports are all unconstitutional, by the way. According to the Iraqi constitution, the Iraqi central government, by the way, the Iraqi constitution was designed and devised by Barzani and some politicians in Baghdad. And it was voted on overwhelmingly by the Kurdish people. And it states clearly that Iraq is a unitary state, and there is no such thing as a referendum for an independent state. But there is an independent state. They have their own army, although there are two armies, I must admit, one led by PUK, one led by Barzani. They have complete control over... No Iraqi policeman, let alone soldiers, allowed to enter the Iraqi Kurdistan without the agreement of the Kurdish regional government. No Iraqi citizen is allowed to go in without some sort of approval. They have created a borderline, although this borderline has been expanded after ISIS took over.
By one-third.
By one-third. So a state is there. The Kurdish people at least are living in peace. They have massive economic potential. Their agriculture has been ruined not by Baghdad, but by Barzani's policies. You talk about people being prosperous in Erbil. Who is prosperous in Erbil? Half my extended family are Kurdish, and some are Turkoman, and some are Arabs like myself. But Erbil has severe poverty. So does Suleymaniya. The Kurdish people in the villages are suffering from poverty. I went through a list of people who are corrupt within the Barzani clique. I didn't go through all the names. You know Sirwan, the nephew of Barzani? He owns the biggest cell phone company in Kurdistan. He's nephew of
Again,
Barzani.
though, why should the Kurds be any different from the Arabs?
Exactly. No, you're right. Well, that's exactly my point. Nobody. I started by criticizing the Baghdad regime, which I probably oppose more than the local regime. But the question is that the Kurdish people have a state, but it's a state ruled by a corrupt clique. Why has he done that? He's a ruler of Kurdistan. His power was threatened by the Kurdish people themselves.
Let's hear from the Kurdish lady. I think it's only fair. We'll hear from you after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Mayadeen television, coming from London, discussing Iraqi Kurdistan and the Kurdish question in general. Madam, please, have your say.
As Mr. Payam already mentioned, when we are actually talking about right of self-determination, it's actually a democratic will. And why should we think about killing women and children? We don't do anything. It's not like when you compare it to ISIS, they do suicide bombs and their aim is to kill people. But we are exercising our democratic will by calling for independence. And why should we think about killing?
Because there's a constitution in Iraq which Kurdistan agreed to, which is that Iraq is a unitary state with autonomy for the Kurdish region. That's a legal fact. But more importantly, it's a political fact.
Kurdistan region is already a state within a state. So Iraq is already broken. So why would we?
No, it's not broken in terms of its foreign affairs and its defense and its territory. This is the key point. You see, the autonomy in Kurdistan can do anything that it likes, but it cannot open relations with Israel. It cannot invite foreign countries to come and have a base there. It cannot conduct its own international relations. There's a limit to how much autonomy any people in a unitary state can have, and I've just given you some of the examples of the limit.
Yeah, and as a doctoral researcher, we have an extra pressure from about 2 million refugees in the region, and we should actually, in this situation, think about the human rights and the population, the rights of the population.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman down here.
I'm Isam. I'm a senior social worker for the council. There are 3 countries around. Partly, few of them are in chaos at the moment, and they're trying to get back their territory through. Yeah, absolutely.
Except Iran.
Yes,
Iran
absolutely.
couldn't be properly described as being in chaos. But.
And Kurdish people, I accept their rights like any other people. Is it wise when countries are trying to become a country by taking away land from ISIS and other people, bringing peace to chaos, creating another situation which can lead to another war? Is it a wise thing to do at this time?
It's a provocation.
Absolutely.
It's a provocation which is encouraged by Israel, the United States, and international legal experts.
And then on top of that, is it wise that you could actually take the risk of getting rid of all of your autonomy in the end by doing this decision?
Well, that wouldn't be easy.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
The Kurdish people are a significant military force, a guerrilla force. Well, Russia and China are against it, and the United States is in favor of it, though in a slightly coded way. Yeah.
In a coded way, yeah.
The United States and Israel explicitly are the only 2 countries supporting it. Professor?
One question is, do the Kurds have a right to organize a referendum? Yes or no? I don't know, right? No. Under national law, I mean. And the second one is the pros and cons of such a referendum. And I've heard a lot of very well-informed arguments from my friends here saying it's not worth it, economically inviable. There are 2 different things. I can only speak in relation to the first one. And as I said, under international law, they do have a right. And it would be easier if the parties and if Iraq sat down and agreed.
What is the international law, just as a matter of interest? What is the international law that allows anyone to organize an nationally, locally illegal referendum and then declare independence? What is that international
law? I don't know in the context of Iraq, because I don't know what the Iraqi constitution says.
I'm asking about the international law.
Well, under international law, all peoples have the right to self-determination, which doesn't mean independence. The Kurds are already exercising their right to self-determination by being an autonomous region or province in Iraq. That's part of their right as a people. The Germans, when they united in 1990, as a people exercised their right as a people to self-determination. The Catalans in their autonomous condition at the moment.
What about the Bavarian demand for independence from
You would need to
Germany?
ask the question.
You're telling me there's an international law that supports
there's
that?
There's a question prior to that. It is whether Bavarian is a people. I don't know. But the Kurds are a people. They do have the right. They have been exercising it. Now they say we are not satisfied with the current status. Our aspirations are to become a state. That is legal under international law in general. But in the particular circumstances of Iraq, I don't know.
All of that would be otiose, Professor, because Iraq has a constitution. And its constitution states that Iraq is a unitary state. And no one can break it.
But was it requested that maybe they should consider amending the constitution, just as you did here in the UK?
Yes. Well, let's hear from Dr. Sami.
The politicians in Baghdad are saying that had Barzani come and ask for amending the constitution whereby a right of referendum is given to the Kurdish people, then this would have been, but instead Barzani did not ask the Iraqi government, did not ask parliament. A third of the MPs in the Iraqi parliament are Kurdish. But he knows, had he done that, no, they have not been dismissed at all. Some of them are still in Baghdad. Even yesterday, Sirwa Abdul Wahid, leader of the Goran Kurdish list, they have enormous popularity in Sulaimania and so on. They proposed a peaceful way. Whereby they could negotiate and ask Parliament, because there is an article in the Constitution which allows changing it. In fact, it was part of a deal done between the various political groups when they did the Constitution to have an article within it that allows changing it, but it has to be done through Parliament.
So briefly, just make a very quick point.
Take the mic though, sir, because we want to hear you.
Ideally, then, to diffuse this problem, to diffuse any armed conflict from arising, as a conflict-preventing measure, the Iraqi state should then offer to amend the constitution within a specific time frame, 6 months, to facilitate a lawful referendum.
Yeah, but then we'd have to have the show. Then we'd have to have the show again next year, because the issue is not do they have the right to have a referendum. The issue is what will happen if the referendum provides a result that says we're going to break away. We're going to break up your country. And this is, you see, I have a right to swing my fist. But my right to swing my fist ends exactly at the point of Dr. Sami's chin. This is an irresistible force and an immovable object. These are things that cannot be squared. If I have a state and I don't want it to be broken up, and you have a right to break it up, you have objectively a conflict of interest. And intelligent politicians would seek a modus vivendi that gave the maximum level of autonomy consistent with the state not actually breaking up. I'm going to give the Kurdish lady, as the only Kurdish person here, the final say. Go ahead, madam.
You have been referring, as many members of the group have been referring to Iraq constitution, and my question is whether any articles of Iraqi constitutions have been breached by other nationals, because as we have a clear example of Article 140 that is not clearly obeyed by, and why should we now at this point for calling for independence referring to Iraqi constitution while it's already been breached in many other ways?
All I can tell you is, from the vantage point, if it is a vantage point of more than 40 years, nearly 45 years in politics, concentrating for most of that time on your region, that the last thing your region needs is more states. Actually, your region needs fewer states and more autonomy within those fewer states. Because thanks to Sykes-Picot, thanks to Versailles, you already got plenty of states, but none of them work. All of them are utterly dysfunctional. All of them are letting down their citizens. And if I were you, and if I were some of you, I would be arguing for going back to the drawing board and redrawing this whole imperialist imposed Sykes-Picot division of the region. Recognition of the Kurdish people as a nationality within that big picture. and the future of autonomous Kurdish regions being able to link up with each other in the pre-existing states. That, I think, is the only actual solution for this. But I'm also old enough to know that that's not going to happen tomorrow. But what is going to happen tomorrow is that some people will swing their fists and some people will say, you better stop just before you reach my chin, or you are impinging on my rights whilst exercising your own. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for what Dr. Sami said about the particular character of the Barzani group, though if power were with the Talibani group, I don't suppose it would be very much different. I believe the Kurds have been let down by their political leaders, by Talibani and Barzani. I know that they have been fighting each other for decades, and they may very well fight each other again. The Kurdish people deserve better. They deserve better in Iraq. They deserve better in Turkey. They deserve better everywhere that they are. There are a very substantial number of Kurdish people here in England, and you are one of them. And again, I'm going to give you the final say. Go ahead.
I am actually here to look from the eyes of a Kurdish national, and that's why I didn't go into detail about what our leaders are doing. I am a Kurdish national, and as a Kurdish national, I don't know about the timing, but I think we should have a right for referendum and for independence.
Just in Iraq?
At the moment, because if
Iraq?
If you compare it, I'm originally from Iraq, and my knowledge is more based on Iraq.
No, you're a Kurdish national.
I am a Kurdish national, and yeah. But if we compare the situation with other parts of the country, of other parts of Kurdistan, we are in better position. We have exercised our autonomous status since 1991, and we have had more freedom.
But Madam, isn't that the opposite of the point? If you are in the best situation in Iraq, why not concentrate on the places where you have the worst situation?
I'm actually going back to the legal side and from the what paper based it's saying.
If
you look at our situation,
Iraq, you paint a very idealistic picture.
If you look at our situation, and if you look at UN Charter and the requirements, we do satisfy the first eligibility requirement, and that's what I think.
The UN isn't supporting your referendum. The UN doesn't support your independence. Whatever the professor says. The UN doesn't and won't.
I'm arguing theoretical, and if you compare it with other parts of
Football's
Kurdistan,
not played on paper, it's played on grass. Yeah. My point is, the Kurdish people are being massacred in Turkey. Yet we're having a program about the breakup of Iraq, where by your own account, the Kurdish people have the best situation. By the way, though many people will not like that, what I'm about to say, they always did. They did since the 1960s have the best situation. The Kurdish lot was better in Iraq than it was anywhere else. It just seems to me a little ungracious to choose Iraq to be the place that has to be focused on. But we're going to have to keep arguing this, and I'm grateful to you for being so brave, alone in this audience, to speak up for your national point of view. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra in this wonderful audience. I hope you enjoyed the show.